As we've been discussing, tonight will be Mike Bloomberg's first debate for elected office since 2009. And it doesn't seem like he'll be able to ease his way back in tonight. His remarkable climb in the polls, thanks at least in some part to record-breaking advertising spending, will likely result in focused attacks from the competition. Joining our conversation, senior advisor for the Bloomberg campaign, Tim O'Brien. Tim O'Brien, I have watched your transformation from journalist and Trump watcher to really what I think Steve and I would describe ourselves as, at the time when we worked for candidates we believed in, dedicated advocate for our candidate. And that's the spirit in which you're here. He's under fire for everything from the kinds of things he said to female employees about getting abortions, about having kids, to policy issues like stop and frisk and redlining. Just broadly, what is the strategy? Is it to take everything on, or is it to really stay strategically in a cold-blooded way focused on Donald Trump as the opponent of everyone on tonight's stage?
Well, you know, I think, Nicole, the logic of his candidacy from the beginning is that he's got more governing experience than anybody else running, that he's the most capable person of running and successfully running a national campaign against Donald Trump. We respect everybody else in the Democratic field that we're campaigning against, but we don't think they're going to be able to survive a national campaign against Donald Trump. And we certainly feel that if Bernie Sanders is at the head of the ticket, there's going to be a lot of down-ballot pain as well. You know, I've been in 12 states at this point. I've spoken to progressive Democratic officials who are running, moderate Democratic officials who are running, and they're all worried about getting torched on the ballot if Bernie's at the head of the ticket. And I think the party has to really look at that in the face. You know, we will support Bernie if he's the nominee. We will support any of the Democrats if they're the nominee. We think all of them are far better than the trash can fire in the White House right now. Having said that, though, Democratic voters have to really put their thinking caps on right now. You know, Bernie is in a position right now where with maybe to 25 to 30% voter support, he could end up getting 80 to 90% of the delegates. And then we will have, as we say in the trade, a situation on our hands. Mike Bloomberg is a flawed man. He does not come into this perfectly. I think it's healthy that we're being asked by the media, and we'll be on the debate stage tonight to answer for Mike's mistakes. But net, Mike Bloomberg is a very principled public servant who has a demonstrable track record here that none of the other candidates do. This isn't a bag of pop promises Mike's bringing to voters now. It's stuff he spent decades delivering on, and bread and butter issues, health care, jobs, education, the environment, guns, and on and on and on. There's nobody that can point to as many things as he can. And I think that's going to matter to voters.
How do you explain, and I appreciate you saying that he's a flawed man. I think jobs like the one you have would all be a lot easier if we were allowed to say that. And it says something.
I'm a flawed man, too, as you know, Nicole.
I'm very flawed, as I think every viewer of this program already knows. But what do you say about the recency of his advocacy for some policies that are pretty unpopular with the Democratic base? Stop and frisk, redlining.
Well, so let's take these step by step.
Sure.
Redlining has been completely misconstrued. I ran the New York Times coverage of the housing crisis with some other editors in 2008. I know what happened there intimately. What Mike Bloomberg was describing was accurate. Very well-meaning, important policies to get credit into low-income communities, which he supports, our campaign supports, also contributed to a broader environment in which subprime loans were packaged recklessly and sometimes fraudulently by investment banks, and it caused the financial sector to crater. That is all true. I think extending credit into low-income communities is important. We should do it. Redlining is bad, but it followed a trajectory that became problematic. That is what Mike said. Bernie's camp has decided to turn that into, oh, he actually thinks we never should have done anything about redlining. There's nothing further from the truth in that. He was against predatory lending as the mayor of New York. We are against predatory lending and lending discrimination as part of this campaign now. That issue is just politics. Stop and frisk. Mike will continue to apologize for it. It is a scar on his record. It was an egregious mistake. He never should have stood by it for as long as he did, but it also does not define his time as mayor of New York. He had the most progressive immigration policy of any big city mayor. The incarceration rate dropped by over 40% when he was mayor. He diversified the NYPD, and we have scores of mayors of color and congressional members of Congress of color who have come out in support of Mike because they know the totality of his career. Mike's not a racist. On women, there's been two big buckets here that are being held up to sort of try to pretend that Mike Bloomberg's a sexual predator, when in fact, of course, we have the most profound sexual predator and sexual deviant in modern history in the Oval Office right now. Mike Bloomberg, most of these allegations about grotesque things he said about women come from a gag book that was written 30 years ago and given to him as a birthday present. He did not write the jokes in the book. He has said he never said any of those things, but those keep popping up in, Bernie's campaign social feeds, our competitors' social feeds, and some media accounts as verbatim things out of Mike's mouth. The second set of these things about sexual harassment claims involving Bloomberg LP, the lion's share of all of those don't include him personally in the suits. They were suits against Bloomberg LP. A number of them happened when he wasn't even at the company. He was the mayor of New York. But you see headlines like 64 women have accused Mike Bloomberg of sexual harassment. Couldn't be further from the truth. One of Mike's key advisors for a very long time is Patty Harris. She was his deputy mayor when he was mayor of New York. She ran Bloomberg Philanthropies, which has been run by women, and she's the chairwoman of our campaign. Mike's partner, Diana Taylor, is a very accomplished economist and a woman. And those are probably the two most important advisors in his life. Every platform in our campaign is. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want to cut you off. It's important to get the facts
every
out.
Platform every platform in our campaign is about empowering women in the workplace and in the world. And if Mike Bloomberg was a racist or a sexist, I wouldn't be out here campaigning for him as vigorously as I can, and as I have. And I'm honored to work with him, as are the range of women and people of color who are part of the 2,100 people we have on the ground right now in 45 states and territories who plan to knock Donald Trump around like a beach ball for the next 7 months.
Tim, tell me about a memo. Your campaign has written a memo articulating what I think anyone that watched 2016 saw happen, like a slow motion car crash, the structural problem that Bernie Sanders at 27% in the national polling is dwarfed by the number of Democrats who support a moderate. You guys have a solution that is audacious. Tell us about it.
Well, our view of this is that moderate Democrats need to coalesce around someone who can win this election and take the primary to where it needs to go. And if they don't come together now and don't look at this in a very cold-blooded and realistic way, they're not going to beat Bernie Sanders. And if they don't beat Bernie Sanders, they're not going to beat Donald Trump. That's the math right now, and that's what we're going to stand behind here.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.